Hello and welcome to Nordic Mythology Podcast. I'm Daniel Farron, co-owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Mathias and Daniel.
Hello. Our guest today is Dr. Luke John Murphy, who is currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Iceland. He's a specialist in pre-Christian Scandinavian religion, and he works, among other things, with the Easter Bunny. But aside from the Easter Bunny,
who is not Scandinavian necessarily, I feel I have to point out in this context.
That is true. Yes. Not Scandinavian and such. But aside from that, you also have worked a little with the blood eagle and as a a way of torturing people, and whether or not it's actually even true. Luke, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me both. Yeah, a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us, and obviously it's a very welcomed accent. We don't get too many Brits on here.
Well, I'm happy to balance the scales a bit. Although, again, in open honesty, I'm not entirely British. I just have the accent. I grew up there.
You said before the show, is it Ireland that you're from?
Yeah, I'm an Irish citizen, but I grew up and went to school in Coventry.
I've got to say, before the show, you did use the word crap. And that's the most British thing that anyone can ever say.
I tell you what, though, it's whenever I'm on the phone to the family, the Irish accent comes out. I'm on Skype or Riverside FM or whatever this program is called with you now. It's going to be super British. I'm going to be dropping T's left, right, and centre. There you go.
That's it. Yeah. We can bully Mathias for once rather than the two Scandinavians on me.
I'll tell you what, I dread to think what this is going to. I dread to think what this is going to do to my Danish accent tomorrow. It's going to be swallowing even more letters than usual.
Oh yeah.
So, where are you now? Are you in Denmark at the minute?
Yeah, I am. So, like Mathias said, I work at the University of Iceland, but I live in Denmark, which I know is a hell of a commute in the best of times. But I haven't seen my office since February, which I know a lot of people have. But my office is several thousand kilometers away. I'm just feeling very grateful I didn't leave anything too important there.
Okay, so how does that work? How is it kind of just you get your base is Iceland, but you get assigned into Denmark to?
No, it's all. I mean, in this instance, it's actually quite official, which surprised me. But basically, at the stage of the academic career that Mathias and I are at, we have we've no power. We don't get to choose anything. We just get short-term contracts, and we've got to go where the work is.
Okay.
And I've got a partner who's got her own life here, and we're very settled, and this is like our family home. And so for the last 4 years, I've been bouncing around from university to university.
Okay.
And purely by luck, essentially, I got a very understanding boss in Iceland who was like, "You don't want to live full time in Reykjavik? Yeah, no problem. Just as long as the work gets done." She's relaxed about where I actually live. So before the pandemic kicked in, I was going to Iceland like once a month or once every 6 weeks or so.
Oh wow! So that's quite cool. So do you teach in Denmark as well? Is that kind of how
bits and pieces? I mean, again, it's not officially. It's not part of my job at the University of Iceland to teach anywhere but the University of Iceland, and the amount of teaching I do there is really small. Like I mostly supervise student research. So I get master students come and write theses with me, but that's just all over Skype anyway. But no, just kind of because I know local people and they've got me here, I get roped in, I get dragged in to teach on various things in Denmark here.
It's such a foreign world to me. It's completely different to anything I know. It seems so strange that you could work in Iceland but live in Denmark.
So a lot of Danes do live a lot of southern Danes will work in Germany and go shopping in Germany and stuff. So they have this category of border worker, or the same, like the Copenhageners will go across to Sweden and they'll live in southern Sweden because it's way cheaper than living in Copenhagen. They'll just commute. So they've got this tax category which is border worker, and I had to fill in the paperwork, and it was border worker and then tick the box for Germany or Sweden, and I had to kind of write in other Iceland, which was weird to explain over the phone, but yeah, they accepted it in the end. So I'm legally a resident in Denmark, which is nice.
Oh, that's quite cool.
Actually, to add a little to the story, when the first time I went to Iceland and like stayed there for a longer period of time, I rented a room with this Danish Icelandic couple, and the husband of the couple, he's actually a police officer in Denmark living in Reykjavik. So yeah, he would commute and work as a police officer in the airport in Copenhagen.
I was in the airport.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can kind of understand that then. I mean, it's still pretty brutal.
Well, I mean, he didn't commute like daily, of course, because that's like 3 hours. But yeah, he did commute and then stayed there for a week and then went back. Like yeah, so there are more people who actually do that than you'd imagine.
I mean, that's insane to me. I used to, when I was a plumber before the whole horns of Odin thing, I used to complain if I had to drive half an hour to work. I was like, fuck this, that's miles away.
But I'll tell you what, I had it the other way around at my last job. I was in Leicester, and when I wanted to come home, like, so I had a flat in Leicester, and I lived there most of the time, and I'd come home for like a long weekend every now and then, like as often as I could. It would take me a day. Like I'd get up at Leicester, I'd leave the flat at like 6 a.m, get on the first train down to Stansted Airport, and fly over. Like Ryanair had a direct line. I hope it survives the pandemic to Aarhus, where I live now. And I'd get in the door at about 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So it was like a proper full-on day of traveling, on top of like the actual toll that being on an airplane and then a train and all the rest of it takes you, and like being cramped into a little seat. I was knackered all the time, just constantly, absolutely constantly. But I'm lucky. I've got a partner who has put up with it until now. I'm not sure she'd be very keen on me going back to doing that kind of thing. I'm not sure I would be very keen on going back to doing that again.
No,
at some point, you're like,
yeah,
I'm too old for this.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah,
absolutely. So, I mean, you're here obviously to speak about the Blood Eagle, which I guess is most people listening, I think, will have heard of it, and it's I guess I kind of almost see it as like the ultimate Viking bro thing. Like it's very you see it mentioned by those kind of like the type I mean, on the very Viking bros on Facebook and Instagram, and it's like the Blood Eagle, and they'll comment in something, Blood Eagle him or whatever, and it's like it's just it's that kind of macho masculine thing.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's been in Vikings twice now.
I think that's probably where most people maybe learn it from. Especially the first time it was in the Vikings, they made it it was quite a graphic scene, and they showed quite a lot of it. So I think most people learned it from there. I think it might have even featured in The Last Kingdom as well, but I'm not sure.
Oh, has it? I should probably try.
It might not have, but I feel like it may have been mentioned.
It's featured in Midsummer as well.
That one I've seen. I've seen. Particularly creepy.
We actually spoke about that a few episodes ago.
Did you?
How insane! Oh yeah, how insane it is.
Yeah, no, it's a creepy movie.
Absolutely. I'm
trying
to think if anywhere else I've seen it.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I've actually seen it anywhere else, like in like media.
I'm kind of I don't know if you guys have played Assassin's Creed Valhalla yet. I'm kind of waiting for it to turn up there. I haven't.
I haven't yet, but I'm sure it will do. Without a doubt, it will pop up. It's got to.
I'd be surprised if it didn't. And as much as I've enjoyed the Assassin's Creed games in the past, I might. I don't know if I can play this one. It might hit a little bit too close to home,
I definitely I will play it. I'm of the other persuasion where I can just like separate it away and kind of be like, okay, this is just fun fantasy, and it's quite cool because it has a few little Easter eggs in it. But other than that, it is what it is, and I'll just separate it aside from the historical version. I'm pretty good at that kind of.
I've been able to do that with all of the others until now. Because I didn't know enough about the time period and that. Pirates, yeah, great. I love pirates. Who doesn't? I'll definitely give it a go. But we'll have to see how long I can stomach it.
Yeah, have a go. So the Blood Eagle. Let's start out maybe by saying what it is.
Okay, so we're talking about the, it turns up on Facebook and you get screen grabs from films and stuff, and you see it on Vikings. And what we understand, a common understanding of the Blood Eagle is that it's a way of executing somebody, or it's a torturous thing, but you're not torturing them for information. You're deliberately torturing them to death by. It's usually you tie their arms out, or you kind of bend them over something, and then you cut open their back and fold out their ribs to form the wings of the eagle, the bloody eagle.
So is that cutting? I guess you would cut the ribs closest to the spine, and then fold out from there. So you'd have where they'd link to kind of like your backbones. You would snip those or cut them and then fold outwards.
Exactly. So you're going down each side of the spine and folding out, and then from each part of the what the medics call the thoracic cavity, like your body, you pull out the lung and you put the lungs on the spread ribs. And there's some descriptions that they have those lungs. I think this is in Midsummer. They have those lungs then kind of beating outside the body, and that's it. Yeah. So that's like the fluttering of the wings. And then you get some of the descriptions we've got are people kind of bearing up to this bravely and appropriately. And I think this was the first one in Vikings where the guy isn't actually tied up; he's kind of suffering it stoically. And then there's some other descriptions where it's like someone suffers this and is a complete coward, and so kind of like it's not just a torturous way of killing people; it's also a way of revealing someone's character. How do they react to this horrific torture?
Oh, I'd be crying like a baby. I'd be sobbing. There'd be snot dripping out my nose. I would be completely pleading for my life.
Or would you? This is where me and my colleagues came in. So that's like the popular understanding of what a blood eagle is. But in academic circles, since when was it? It would be the late 80s. There was this kind of famous debate between two of the big giants in the field. Roberta Frank on the one side and a guy called Bjarni Einarsson, an Icelander, on the other, who argued about, did this ever actually really happen? And generally speaking, it seems Roberta Frank convinced most people that, the whole thing is made up. It's a misunderstanding, either accidental or deliberate, where the oldest source we've got is actually a piece of poetry. It's called Knudstrauper. And it's skaldic poetry, if that tells anything, if that says anything to you in the audience. But this stuff is really, really hard. Like the word order is completely all over the place. It's really kind of confusing. They use lots of unusual terms and stuff. So it's very difficult to understand, deliberately so. And this was kind of part of the fun. It was halfway between rap and riddles when it was performed. So you were supposed to kind of sit down afterwards and memorize it and then figure out what happened. And what Roberta Frank basically said is that someone composed one of these poems that had kind of a motif, like a visual picture of someone's back and an eagle. And what most people haven't understood is that this wasn't composed in kind of regular West Norse, the kind of standard Viking language, as it were. It was composed in an Anglo-Scandinavian dialect, like the sort of Old Norse that was spoken by that hybrid society that you get in the Last Kingdom, where it's kind of part Anglo-Saxons or kind of early English speakers, and part kind of Norwegians or Danes or Old Norse speakers. And so that's actually played with the language a bit. And so we've all misunderstood this poem. There wasn't an eagle getting cut into someone's back. It was just there was a literal eagle who cut someone's back. And so it's this motif of the dude is dead, lying face down, and there is a carrion eater tearing at his back.
Which is something that eagles do, I guess.
They absolutely do.
So, I mean, there's videos of eagles picking up goats and all sorts, I guess. So
there you go.
So I think it would be something that could happen. I think I even saw. I can't remember. It was like an article or a video of a runner who got attacked by, I think it was an eagle or a smaller bird. That for some reason his bald head had been quite the thing for it to, and it'd come down and it was like. But I mean, it made some deep cuts in the top of
Yeah.
the guy's head. You know, he's running along, and the bird, for whatever reason, thought he'd have a go at it, and he'd come down and kind of grabbed it with its talons and really ripped some holes in it.
What was the name of that Greek philosopher? There's a famous Greek philosopher, I've forgotten which one, who died when an eagle dropped a rock on his head. Because this is how that particular Greek eagle hunts for tortoises, by dropping rocks on them to crack the shells.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. It's ringing some vague bell. Obviously, we also have, of course, the myth of Prometheus, who gets tied to a rock and all that stuff, and eagle at his liver. Yeah, no, I mean, eagles in context of carrion eating or eating a body is very standard, I would say, in all over Europe, and also, of course, in Old Norse poetry.
Yeah, totally.
So it makes sense, right?
Not only Old Norse, also Old English. This is something that Old English and Old Norse poetry shares, is this motif of the beasts of battle, which is the eagle, the raven, and the wolf. And these are the three animals that will kind of turn up after a battle and eat corpses. So one way you can kind of elliptically refer to a battle without being as gauche as to say there was a battle is to say that, like, the wolf was well fed, or the eagle had lots of food, or whatever. So it's a totally standard reference.
I mean, if you ever come across, maybe like, I guess the last time I remember it was when there was a cat that was run over outside, and I took our dogs for a walk, and I just remember hearing this noise of, like, it was the crows that were just kind of squawking and howling almost. And
they love that.
There must have been like 20, 30 of them in the air just circling, because the cat was obviously being run over, but was in the middle of the road. So none of them wanted to go down into the road to get it, because they knew that the cars were going to get them. So they were just circling. And I mean, it was an horrific noise. And before I realized kind of what had happened, I was like, what the fuck is going on here? It was almost apocalyptic, and just these crows swirling in the noise. I was like, oh my God. And it was like, once I figured out it was a cat, that obviously did realize that it was food. It was dinner time.
Well, they reckon. They don't reckon. They've proven. They've documented that in the wild, ravens and wolves will form like I've forgotten the word for it, where two species live and work together. But basically, like a raven will adopt a wolf and will lead the wolf to prey, so that when the wolf has eaten most of the big stuff and kind of left the bones and bits of gristle and whatever, the raven will happily pick at those.
Okay.
So
that's quite cool, yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Like symbiosis?
Symbiosis, there we go.
Yes.
You can tell which one of us is in the morning of his time zone as opposed to the evening of his time zone.
Oh, I don't know about that.
So to get back to the Blood Eagle.
Blood Eagle, right.
Obviously, that's the earliest we know of it. And I guess, like you say, that could be taken either way. Do we know kind of it? Because obviously, I mean, in the poem, I'm assuming it doesn't say they cut the ribs, they fold them out and pulled. So where does that come from? Because obviously, or has that been kind of made up after to explain how you would make an eagle?
That's the debate. So the poem says that there was an eagle, something his back, and then so even the poem itself isn't composed like on the spot. It's composed in like 1020s, 1030s for Canute the Great, who's coming over from Denmark. But it's referring back to an earlier Viking invasion of the British Isles, back in the when are we, 860s, 870s. So there's this kind of whole, like, over a century that the poet is kind of calling back to. And then it's exactly the same thing. So we have medieval texts from the 11th, 12th, and 13th centuries, kind of prose texts. Most of them are Old Norse, and there's a single one in Latin that describe a blood eagle. And these are, again, kind of talking about events that happened a long time in the past, and we don't know where they're getting their information from. It might be that... Sorry, go on.
Sorry, is the Latin one, is that Dudo's History of the Normans?
No, it's not. It's Saxo Grammaticus.
Huh. Isn't there also I thought there was a reference to it in the History of the Normans. If
there is, I missed it. So I might have to check this after tomorrow at work first thing.
No, sorry for research here. No, I'm so, and it might be just me mixing something up here, but I feel like there is a example of somebody who gets punished. But it could also be an interpretation. There's like this weird reference in Doodle, in its history of the Norman, where he says that they will, these pagans, they will spread people's bodies out as some kind of sacrifice to Thor or something like that. I might be conflating a couple of things here. But yeah, no, I thought there was one reference in there somewhere.
Leave it with me. I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right, Dan. Basically, then we've got these later texts, and they're more detailed. And so some of them just say, or it kind of, the implication is they've cut the shape of an eagle into someone's back.
Okay.
So that's Saxo Grammaticus Matthias. That's like the one Latin one. It literally uses the Latin word figurante, meaning kind of the shape, the outline, the form of an eagle, and then it describes how they rub salt in the wounds.
Okay, so that'd be more like with a knife, you would
Exactly.
just draw an eagle and then
That just sounds incredibly annoying.
It's like a really bad tattoo. But apparently he dies from it. So they might have been cutting with a steak knife.
They've obviously gone deep enough.
Exactly.
I mean, I still wouldn't want anyone to carve an eagle into my back, whether it was deep or not deep.
Yeah, agreed. Wholeheartedly agreed. I mean, there are archaeologists out there who try and reconstruct stuff and kind of do experimental archaeology, living like Vikings. Great, but I'll give that weekend a miss. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we, like you say, you've got them drawing on it.
You've got them drawing on it, but then there's another bunch of texts from kind of the same period, from that same kind of later period, where it's really involved, and they kind of do the full blood eagle, as it were, almost the full eagle as we've come to know it from Vikings, where they cut the ribs down the spine, they crack the ribs open, and they pull the lungs out. And in one of them, at least, that actually says this is what the blood eagle was. It's really quite explicit.
Okay.
And in all of these cases, there's 9 texts, including the poem. The victim dies. This isn't something you do. Even the kind of fairly superficial ones don't appear to be something that was done just to punish someone. It was done to kill them.
Yeah. Okay.
And a lot of those
and I guess it's to make a statement as well. It's almost that putting somebody on a pike outside the hall. It's you fucked up, so here you go, and here's a message to anybody else who's maybe thinking of doing the same thing.
Spot on. I mean, if you want to kill someone, just stab them. They'd be just as dead. And so, kind of to come back to the project that I've been working on, I didn't realize quite how much effort and work one of these things would be. I just I read this text and you crack the ribs and whatever. But I've been working on this little project with 3 medical doctors who basically took a long, hard look at all of these descriptions and tried to work out, is this even anatomically possible? So exactly as we were talking about, you got to crack the ribs. I think you actually used the word bend earlier, Dan. I mean, ribs don't bend easily.
Okay, yeah.
And so what we did was we basically sat down and went through it all with a fine tooth comb. And the medics and anatomists have come away and said, look, this is technically possible to do all this stuff. But there's a huge rake of kind of complications that just never occurred to historians and archaeologists like Matthias and myself. As we don't deal with living people, and living people are complicated. They get blood everywhere.
Well, yeah.
Right.
That's one of the things. Yeah.
So you wouldn't have been crying and screaming, Dan. You wouldn't have been able to breathe very soon after this whole process started. So as soon as you break into the thoracic cavity, the bit where your lungs are.
Yeah. So I guess you need I assume you need it to be airtight for pressure
to be able to breathe. Exactly. As soon as you break into that cavity, your lungs shrivel up to the size of fists. And they definitely don't beat.
For some reason, the movie 3 Kings always comes to mind whenever that kind of comes up. He has to put. I don't know if it's the same thing, but he has a thing that he puts in his chest where he has to let air.
That's it.
Out.
That's it.
for some reason that always sticks with me. I think it's George Clooney, and he's handcuffed at the end with his arms behind his back, and he's like gonna die, and he needs to turn this little valve, and obviously just gets to do it. Sorry if I've just spoiled that for anyone, but it is maybe 20-year-old.
I was going to say it's been like 15 years since I watched that. I do not remember it at all. But that's exactly it. So like when I did first aid courses and stuff in the TA, like we were given these plasters, one-sided plasters with valves on, and if someone got shot in the chest, it was a sucking chest wound, and you could hear the air. You were supposed to wipe off the blood, stick this thing on, and then suck the excess air out, so their lung could still inflate and deflate.
Yeah, so that's what it will be. So you, like you say, you have to have that equal pressure, I guess, in there. So like you say, as soon as you cut through the back and through the ribs, then you're pretty much dead to them.
Well, that's it. I mean, you can't breathe. Like you can't even attempt to breathe because making all those cuts as well severs the muscles, including like the diaphragm down at the bottom here, that allow you to breathe in and out. So you're going to be unconscious in a matter of seconds. So if they were doing the kind of superficial thing, just carving into your back, you're probably going to, you're going to die from blood loss on the spot, or you're going to survive and die from an infection. But all of our text says so-and-so dies on the spot. So we're thinking, right, let's see what happens if you were to actually carve into somebody. Basically, as soon as you puncture that, they're going to start asphyxiating.
So I assume we can kind of rule out that Viking scene where the lungs are beaten, so that we can kind of just get rid of that.
Wouldn't happen
right off the bat.
Wouldn't happen.
Okay.
But I remember the first Blood Eagle that like he gets halfway through and then the dude's hand falls off the post he's holding on, and they kind of make eye contact in a manly way, and then he puts his hand back on. Again, just not going to happen. You're going to be unconscious.
Yeah.
Even before you get to breaking into the cavity. Because to get into the cavity and kind of break away the ribs, you've got to cut not only the skin, but the muscles have got to come off the back as well.
Well, that's a good point. I didn't even think of that. Now you said it. You've got some pretty big. Big muscles. I think is your latimus dorsi is your big thick muscles at the back, and they're not small muscles. It takes a little bit of cutting through, and I imagine it's quite painful.
Yeah, totally. And you would probably have bled to death. By the time they've got all those muscles off, you fall unconscious once you've lost half of your blood, and you start getting kind of dizzy and out of it and not coherent anymore. Once you've lost, I think, 33% of your blood. And the more cuts you make, the more skin and soft tissue you remove, the quicker the blood flows out. Basically, if you're doing this huge, complicated, bloody ritual to someone, you're doing most of it to a corpse.
So it's kind of a statement, I guess.
Well, that's what we.
And you're going to be put somewhere after, I assume, for people to see.
Well, that's never actually described. So like we absolutely have Matthias jump in here with examples. I'm sure we've got like the conspicuous display of dead bodies. Like that is absolutely a part of late Iron Age Nordic culture. So like hanging sacrifices with Adam of Bryn, like the bodies are literally hanged from the trees of the temple and presumably are left there. Or Ibn, which one is he? Is it Ibn al-Tartushi, who is a Jewish travel writer from the Moorish Caliphate in Spain, goes up to southern Denmark and he's like, oh, these Danes, when they sacrifice to their god, they cut the head off the animal and put it on a stick outside their house so everybody can see they're sacrificing. Put exactly as you said, putting stuff outside and putting bits of bodies outside to be seen is a huge part, but it's never mentioned in these texts, which is either like suspicious. Maybe this stuff is being made up by Christian monks because they didn't understand the poetry, or it's something a little bit different to some of the more mainstream kind of body display stuff in Viking culture. Which I guess,
or maybe it could be like a spectacle where the village would come around and watch, almost the way the public hanging used to be, kind of back a couple of 100 years ago. Like everybody would come and they'd watch, and it would be a spectacle. I
completely agree. I think that's what it was. I think it wasn't the thing seeing afterwards. I think it was the doing that mattered. It was like the process, and once it was done, the guy's corpse was whatever they would usually do with the corpse. But you touched on an interesting thing. They're talking about the village. This wasn't like done for or in front of like villagers, ordinary people. This is something that like the martial elite are doing to each other, like the toughest of the Viking warriors, the professional warriors, are the people who do this, and who have this done to them. This is like a high end thing, like a military thing. So this I don't think has been commented on before, but the Blood Eagle seems to be a revenge ritual. It's done by usually rulers, kind of kings and princes and things, to other would-be rulers, or in some cases other kings and princes.
Just before we go too far down that route, I just thought maybe if we just jumped back to whether it's physically possible.
Yes, yeah, sure.
Let's kind of finish that off, and then we can go kind of like down because that sounds really interesting, kind of like who does it and what. Because I just assumed it could be done to anybody, which obviously sounds not. But so we're kind of at cutting through the muscle, and then I guess you've got to get through the ribs, which isn't going to be necessarily easy.
Is not. So the saga sources, the descriptive sources, say that a sword is used, which is a crap implement to break ribs with, right? Because you're either going to go too deep and the dude is immediately going to choke to death, or you're going to cut his heart just by, again, assuming he's face down, you're going to go into the heart. But there are so many ribs, and not just the ribs connected to the spine, the bone connection. There's also all these ligaments, really tough, strong ligaments. And so I thought it was interesting that all the written sources, bar one, say a sword is used. The other says it's a sax, which is like a fighting knife, like a combat knife, this big, single-edged.
It's still kind of a short sword, though. It's a lot bigger than a dagger.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they don't usually have a hilt. So it's, okay. I would have said it was more like it's a big knife. But we're also like, we've got big knives or short swords from several centuries of all across Scandinavia, and they're different because people made them differently. So who knows what exactly was in the guy's head when he wrote this particular description. He might have been thinking of something quite specific. But the Vikings TV show, they swap out for a little hatchet. It's got to have a really, really small hatchet so we can hack at the ribs.
That's right, yeah.
But again, you got to risk going straight through and killing the guy outright.
Yeah, you almost want kind of like bolt cutters, I guess.
Spot on. So this for me was one of the most interesting things. Was like
I feel like my sadistic side's coming out.
You're thinking about this a little bit too carefully.
Yeah.
Knowing the names of the muscles and all that kind of stuff. I'm getting suspicious.
That's it.
I'm just gonna check what it's called, but there's a stone, a Gotlandic picture stone. Does that say anything to you?
Well, to me, of course, but
yeah, sorry, Dan. So on Gotland, they've got these big stones. They're like 2-3 meters tall, and they're a little bit like comic strips. They're carved with figures in little boxes. And we don't know if they tell stories or anything. Some people think some of them do, but there's one carving. There's a panel on the Stora Hammars et stone, which is from the Viking Age, and there's this picture where one man is bending another man over something, and there's some weird symbols around it and some potentially Ogenic imagery, and he's got a spear in the other hand. And so I was talking about swords and knives with my anatomical colleagues, and they were like, "But what about that one with the spear? What one with the spear?" So we don't know if this panel is actually a blood eagle or not, but this got us talking about spearheads. And basically, we took a look at some Viking Age spearheads, and most of the spearheads have little, they call them lugs. So if you imagine, like this pen is the top of a spear shaft, there's little bits that stick out.
Okay.
And during the Viking Age, those are mostly decorative. They don't have much function because they're quite small. But we were talking about, well, if you've got big enough ones, what you can actually do is you could catch those over the top of the rib, hold the haft with both hands, and just yank towards yourself. And the word that one of my colleagues used was you could unzip the ribs. So basically, instead of like a dozen 20 tiny little strikes all the way through and getting a knife and cutting the ligaments, which takes forever and is hard work, you just do it twice down each side.
But it would still require a lot of strength to do that.
It would. But
yeah.
one person could do it.
you're going through bone, though. I feel like to get through a bone, you'd have to saw it almost.
You could
It
crack them
would,
apparently. So this guy has done. I don't know if he's done this particular thing. Probably not. But he's performed surgical stuff as far as I understand it. And he assures me that this is totally possible.
okay.
Um,
I mean, I
Alrighty.
guess it depends on how they attached. I mean, I'm clearly just speculating, but it depends on how they attach to the actual vertebrae column. The column. I guess it would be quite flimsy when you think of a rib. It's quite long and wraps around. Where it attaches, I imagine it would crack if you gave it a little bit of
well,
force.
that's what the anatomists have told me. Is so that they've referred in our written formal study. They've referred to this study of car crashes, because exactly that. If you've got kind of blunt force on the front of the body, it can happen that your entire ribs push backwards and they snap next to the spine.
Okay. Okay.
So that is a kind of a brittle point, is my understanding. And I should probably say now that I hope I'm not misrepresenting anything the medics have said. If I am, it's my fault, not theirs.
Okay. Nice little disclaimer there.
Yeah, got to get it in, otherwise I'll be in trouble.
Okay, so
Okay.
let me just. Okay, now there are some interesting things that are happening in my brain because you're talking about Ogenic imagery. Obviously, the Storhammer one. That's the stone that has the what do you call those? The little the three interlaced triangles too, right? So
Exactly.
everybody who's into like Viking stuff has seen this somewhere.
Exactly.
So there's that, and then we have this person doing this to him, and if that's actually a blood eagle thing, it's interesting that it's all laced in Odinic imagery, and of course we also know that Odin has a tendency to show up as an eagle once in a while. So there are things going on here. That's exciting.
There are two bird shapes on either side of this potential blood eagle. I'll be honest with you, I'm not convinced this is a blood eagle. It could be. I'm not saying it's not. But I think, unfortunately, the stone isn't that well preserved. It would have been painted in the Viking Age, which would have made stuff a lot easier to see. All the paint's worn off. So we've got basically two colours. It's black and white, and it's hard to tell. And I've checked, actually. They've got just earlier this year, a guy went around and did like 3D scannings in like super fine detail, and even with that we can't tell.
Okay.
But it could be. It's possible that this was a blood eagle, as we understand it.
I mean, what else could it be?
No. So the figure that's being bent forward is really small. It's like half the size of the adults, and like they didn't do scale the way we do scale.
Okay.
But it could be a child. And the thing it's being bent over, that could be. It looks like it's some sort of structure with horizontal and vertical kind of frames to it. So that could have been absolutely something, some sort of frame for torturing people on, or it could just be a chair, or it could be a chest. I mean, we've got stories that are just as old as these ones about children being hidden in chests. So who knows? There are so many other possibilities.
Well, actually, for some reason, I have always thought of it as an example of somebody being drowned in a well.
Totally. Yeah, I'm looking at it now, so this is why I keep looking off to the side.
Yeah.
It could be that. It could be a drowning.
Yeah, this is because it could be that type of ritual scene as well. We have. I'm going by memory here, but I think we have a tree next to them as well, right?
Could be tree branches. Could be an eagle's claws.
Okay.
This is how vague this stuff is.
Yeah. Okay. And then we also have warriors in procession, right?
Yeah. This is one of the Odinic imageries. We've got warriors who seem to be lining up, all holding their shields with their swords up in the air like this, walking or looking towards this scene. So
well, I mean, I guess that would kind of go back to what you were saying before about this being the military, the kind of elite that would do this. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if we want to jump into that and kind of because I find that really interesting, because I guess I just assumed it was some sort of punishment for the really naughty. So if you've been particularly bad, then this is what you got.
If you're a pretender to the throne, you are really naughty, right? I mean, that's
Well, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't disagree. It's a revenge ritual.
Mm-hmm.
But being really naughty in this instance seems to be you killed my father or my brother in a really shitty way.
Okay.
Like it's so people have been saying for a long time it's seems to be triggered by the death of a male relative. So in one instance, it's a blood brother who gets killed, and the killer of the blood brother is then subjected to a blood eagle. There's another case in the Orkneys where a Norwegian prince, for want of a better word, um, burns a local jarl to death in his hall in Norway, then sails out to Orkney and tries to take over Orkney and fails and is captured in battle, and he gets blood eagled. But
Okay.
the local jarl in Orkney was the son of the guy he murdered back in Norway.
Okay.
So it really seems to be a revenge for dead male relatives. But what's not been spotted before, and I think is quite convincing, is that these dead male relatives, with like one or two exceptions, they don't die good deaths. Like, not that any death is good, right? But particularly in a like a military elite setting, there's an honourable death or a good death or a more desirable death than others.
Mm-hmm.
And most of these guys who are the trigger killings, they die in really bad ways. Like the guy who gets murdered in Norway, he's burnt alive in his hall. Um, the the blood brother who gets killed, he's made to do the fatal walk, which is another one of these Viking tortures of dubious historicity, which is where your stomach gets cut open and your guts are pulled out, and they get nailed to something, usually a tree, and then the victim is made to walk around it, and in doing so, you're pulling your own guts out.
Okay, put a pin in that. I want to hear more about that one.
But basically, there's these kind of dishonorable, or I don't know, maybe unmanly, or just generally not a nice way to go. And then once
I guess
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I guess for me, it feels like it's almost maybe they've gone in ways where they haven't been able to defend themselves in battle. Almost. I guess I don't know whether it's linked to the whole kind of going to Valhalla type situation, but it's almost like getting burnt in your hall is. It's sneaky.
Yep.
It's done where it strips away your ability to protect yourself and to fight and to defend yourself and have a fair chance. Almost, it's very underhanded, and it is just a bit of a horrible way to do it. It's not kind of what you would assume to be kind of quote unquote Viking, which is very much face to face, man to man, hand combat almost.
Right, and just like people today, in the military or in chem sport, martial arts will talk up, the kind of honor of fighting in a fair fight and all the rest of it. Of course, in reality, some people would have been like that. Others would have been exactly as you say. They would have taken every advantage they got. They would have burnt people alive. They would have stabbed them in the back. They would have killed prisoners and things. And that was regarded back then to be just as terrible as we regard it today. So you had both the kind of the ideal that some people lived up to or tried to live up to, and then you had people who just didn't even bother and did whatever was necessary. And it seems to be that latter group, the sneaky guys, the naughty guys who get blood eagled.
Okay.
So it seems to be this. You did something really bad to a man in my family. I'm going to do something really bad to you, the blood eagle.
Okay.
And that's what I think we're talking about earlier. It's not the necessarily the showing of the body afterwards. I think it's the doing that matters.
So could it be almost like a disrespect of the body? Yeah. I guess like some cultures have that idea where I guess what comes to mind would be the Egyptians, where it's you take your body to like the afterlife. So do we know that? Is that kind of like similar with kind of like Norse mythology? Would you, if your body was defaced in life, would you kind of take that with you? I
wouldn't say so, no. But they did do some weird stuff with dead bodies. So there's some practices where if they were worried about ghosts coming back, and for the Vikings, a ghost seems to have been more like what we'd call a zombie. It's more like
Okay.
kind of a combination of our ghost and our zombie. They knew who they were, they'd got an agenda, but they were physically present and they were really strong and hard to kill. But there are some cases where people have been buried, and then a little bit later the grave has been opened up again, and extra heavy rocks have been put on the body, presumably to keep them in place, and then they've been reburied.
Okay.
So there is a concern with what happens to the body afterwards, but there is a distinction. Like you go somewhere else and you leave your meat behind. Seems to be seems to have been a common word, at least. I don't know, Matthias, you want to jump in on that?
Well, I mean, we have some interesting, curious burials and other things that have happened to bodies, right? In the Viking Age, Denmark is the place that I'm most familiar with in that regard. We of course have like those two men who have been sacrificed or punished, like executed basically at Tiser in Denmark, right? And I think in the 9th century, if I remember correctly. So two individuals that have been basically thrown in. I think it's in a like small river. Put in the river, the bodies decapitated, and then they put the heads between the legs. And you're gonna have to ask yourself, well, what does that mean? That it does not seem like it was intended to be some kind of like a honorable way of going into death with your head between your legs.
But you bring up an interesting case, because there's the pig face lady.
So now I want to hear about this.
Right. Okay. So this is the technical name is Berka 959, which is the 959th grave they excavated the site of Berka, which is on an island in Lake Mälaren in Sweden, which is this huge kind of like proto-urban center. Like just before they really got towns and stuff, they had these trading centers. In England, they were called wicks. And this woman was super high status. Like she's buried with fancy clothing and really fancy jewelry and expensive tools and stuff. She's clearly really high status, the sort of woman who might have been married to the type of guys who were doing blood eagles to each other. But she's been beheaded. And so you wonder, okay, hang on a minute, she's been beheaded is because she did something bad, she screwed up, she offended someone, then why have they buried her with all of her fancy stuff? Why have they given her such an honorable burial? And the reason I mentioned the pig is because her jawbone is missing. Now, she was beheaded. It might just be that the jawbone was shattered or destroyed when what was presumably an axe came through. But what they've done, they seem to have provided her with another jawbone, a pig's jawbone. So if you think that this was done when she was buried, so she's there with, her from here down, she's fine from the neck down. Then from kind of the cheekbones up, she's there. And then in the space in between, it seems, they've put like half a pig's face to plug the gap almost.
Okay.
And like, what does that mean? We have no idea. It might not have meant anything. It might have been because someone thought it was funny. Well,
that's true. I guess it could be that. Or I guess it could be like trying to complete, maybe a family trying to complete the body in some way. Stuff like that's so fascinating.
It could be almost anything.
Yeah, and there are some weird things happening with bodies. Like, I think it's one of the wells in one of the Harald Bluetooth's ring forts. Maybe the one near Slagelse, Trelleborg, where we have found, what is it, like a chopped off hand and a head. Just like random body parts. And you can always theorize, this has something to do with like a crime that was committed. Like, for instance, trying to, hide the identity of a person by taking their head. I think it's a little far-fetched because you'd still be able to identify the body, and I think possibly their clothes or something like that. But it's just interesting to see that, then, in this well, there's like human body parts that show up. And what kinds of human body parts? Well, it's the ones that in some ways, so correspond to mythological aspects as well, like chopped off hand. I don't know. Me as somebody who knows a lot about Nordic mythology, I'm thinking, that sounds like Tyr. The head, that sounds like Mimir. Who knows? Like the thing is also that we have so little access to actually knowing what went on in the heads of these peoples. We just know that they did a lot of funky stuff with people's bodies back then. And there's got to be some kind of like ideological, mythological underpinning to that, something that explains why that happens. Just like we today have something that explains why we do certain things that can seem completely outlandish to a foreign culture or people 200 years from now. I mean, think about how we rationalize death penalty. And how we do death penalty in modern society, right? It has to be like this very clinical, clean kind of thing, not the whole beheadings and display of bodies like it was 200 years ago, because we've gone through, a so-called civilizing process where we've come up with a lethal injection that might actually like make people suffer incredibly when they die, and all that stuff, right? So that's another way that we in modern, at least in America, rationalize these things, right? And make it feel okay. These people must have had similar ways of explaining why they did what they did and why it was meaningful and why it was okay to do that to another human being, right?
Yeah, agreed.
I mean, from an outsider's perspective, it almost feels like the Blood Eagle and some of the other ones you've mentioned, it's kind of like almost like a gang killing, in the sense of that maybe the punishment of the defacing the body is to fit the crime that you did. Kind of like the mafia used to cut your testicles off and stick them in your mouth, or like the Colombian necktie where you slice the neck and pull the tongue out through the gap for snitches. It's that kind of. It's not just killing you. It's the defacing the body and mutilating the body. That one sends a message to others, but also two it's just pure disrespect. It's like, you disrespected us, so we're going to disrespect you in kind of like the death is not just as simple as a bullet to the head or a knife to the heart or whatever. It's the ultimate kind of, it is disrespect, I guess.
Well, maybe. I mean, we don't know, because I agree with like 90% of what you've just said. I love the analysis with analog with gang killings. That's brilliant. I've not thought of it. But the one thing that the Blood Eagle does, it's only the martial elite, the military tip of the spear, the rulers who are doing this to each other. So if you do this to someone, you're kind of tacitly acknowledging that they belong to that same class as you, right?
Okay.
So it's a little bit like the woman who was beheaded and then buried with all her fancy stuff. So sure, she might have done something horrendous and therefore been beheaded, but you still you didn't like toss her body naked in a marsh or something. You gave her the fancy burial, the fancy kind of grave goods and everything. It's a similar thing with the Blood Eagle, that you wouldn't, as you say, you wouldn't take this, go through all this effort unless there was a reason for it. But part of what you're communicating, whether it's I've avenged my father, or don't cross me snitches, part of what you're communicating at the same time is, this dude used to be one of us.
But that's almost what like gang stuff would be as well, though.
Yeah.
Like with the mafia, when they would cut, like you say, they cut your testicles off and shove them in your mouth, that was kind of like, you were one of us, but we're going to ultimately disrespect you now because you've done whatever to cross, and then you're not part of this anymore, I guess.
Yeah, fair. I was just pointing out that, like, from the outsider's point of view, for like me, I've nothing to do with gang stuff in real life. Like, GTA is the closest I get. If I came across this in real life, I'd be like, whoa, what the fuck?
Yeah.
But then I would still see both the victim and the perpetrator were gang people. In these terms. So you're kind of partially throwing this person out, but at the same time you're acknowledging they belong to you. So I don't think we disagree.
No, it's just like, say, it's me from like completely from the outside, and that's all just kind of where my mind goes automatically, is that you're going through all this effort and there must be a reason for it in the fact that it's ultimately to send a message, but it's also kind of like, does it fit the crime, and that it's like a disrespect almost after, and that you've done something so bad you have to be disrespected.
Yeah, and that I think is spot on. I mean, it seems to be these weird trigger killings. So we had the fatal walk, we had the burning to death, we had one guy is thrown into a pit of snakes. There's a fourth one. What's the fourth one? It slipped my mind. Anyway, there's some weird killings that kick this blood eagle off.
Okay. So we've kind of established that it's possible. Like, it technically possible.
Technically, yep.
Not obviously not to the extent of the beating kind of lungs, but I guess the next thing is, do you think that it happened? I know you said there's some debate about that, but I mean, maybe in your opinion or kind of what you've learned, do you think that it did happen to somebody at some point?
Okay,
or...
so here's the short, honest answer. I don't know.
Okay.
But what
it's complicated is the one that we usually use on here.
Oh, fair enough, right?
True.
It's complicated. But what we set out to do was to basically disprove it. We decided, like, right, this sounds so stupidly extreme. We don't think this is physically possible, and then we worked out the business with unzipping the ribs and stuff like that. And then we had discussions about what sort of tools people would have used and the options for that, and we can go into that if you'd like. So anatomically, as we've established, it's possible. And then we also looked at, okay, so like socially, is it acceptable? Is it okay to rip a guy's ribs out and pull his lungs and all the rest of it? And sure, it's not normal. It's like a really extreme case. But as we've been talking about the whole way through so far, it's an outlier to a lot of other trends that are going on. That bodies are getting displayed. That you are doing weird things to bodies in the first place, right? So one of the texts, so several of the texts actually don't have the guy who's been offended, who's lost a male family member. They don't have him doing the blood eagle himself. But it seems more normal that he didn't do it himself. He had like a I've forgotten the word. Sorry, I'm getting tired.
Sorry.
He'd got a retainer is the word we use in academia. Like if this is a gang, he's got one of his mates to come in and do it for him on his behalf. Not because he's weak or anything. He's having it done. It's the same thing, but he's getting like a lieutenant to step in and do the dirty work.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that in one of these, most of these texts just say, and it was done, right? That they use a passive construction. But in a couple of the texts, it's quite explicit who did it. And one of them is a guy called Reyin, who is a famous mythological character. He's a dwarven smith. And smiths had all sorts of skills, right? So the lord, the warrior lord, is going to surround himself mostly with other warriors, but he's also going to have some of his hangers on, some of the guys in his crew are going to have specialist skills. There's going to be the skald, the kind of, the poet, the propagandist, the rapper, however you want to think of him. He's the guy who sees what you do and tells everybody about it. He's your PR department. There's going to be the smith who looks after your gear, who unbends your sword, who sharpens your knives, stuff like that. There's him as a kind of technical specialist. And there's probably going to be some sort of priest as well, or ritual specialist. And it might actually have been that for a lot of these guys, the warrior lord was the kind of priest specialist, was the ritual specialist. But there might have been a separate guy in some cases. And the smith then might have been the person who did medical stuff potentially. And I'm speculating here. I'm definitely reaching, but one way that basically the only way you could make steel or kind of hard iron in Iron Age Scandinavia was by burning human bodies, was by cremating a human body and using the fat that burned off a human body to get the fire hot enough to make carbonized iron, to make and then maybe some soft steel. So smiths definitely were mixed up in doing weird stuff to dead bodies. They were definitely mixed up in dealing with dead bodies. And they were skilled with tools, which you would have needed a certain level of skill to pull off a blood eagle. I mean, sure, some of it's just brute force, like cracking ribs and stuff. You might need 2 people to crack a pair of ribs open, but anybody could do it. Whereas as like skinning the carcass and then cutting muscles off, you would have needed some familiarity with butchery and stuff. Maybe that wasn't a smith, but anyway, smiths have got technical skills. The other person that's named who steps in is it's a really weird word, even in Old Norse, and it means it's Otakastur, which is the person most skilled with a point.
Okay.
Like, even I had to look that up. I was like, what on earth is this? And it's like literally that the word is just built up of bits that mean most point skilled. What? So I looked up like in the dictionary these other places that it's used, and it's basically used of carpenters. It's the person who's good with a chisel or a knife for carving stuff. And the only other place that the superlative form, like not just someone who is skilled with a point, but someone who is the most skilled with a point, is a bone worker, someone who was carving ivory from a walrus tusk.
Okay.
So maybe we're dealing with a body modifications person. Like we've got lots of circumstantial evidence that in the Viking Age people were tattooing themselves. We've got literal evidence they were carving lines into their teeth. So body mods were a thing in the Viking Age. Body mods as we think of them today, like there's this group of related practices of piercings and tattoos and stuff. Maybe in some like kind of warrior bands, there was a dude who was into body mods. And then doing this sort of stuff, whether it was medical treatment or torture or both, this was part of his responsibility. He was like the platoon medic or whatever, who also tortured people and did your piercings. I mean, it sounds really weird.
No, actually, I have to say that it sounds very acceptable to me because, yeah, as I think you were just about to say, well, in modern times, these institutions and offices, they're all split up. But back then, people weren't that specialized. And also, I mean, we know this from just a couple of 100 years ago, I think, where, it was the smith who would pull out the tooth, in the village, in those kinds of things.
Or it was the barber who'd take out your appendix because it was barber surgeons, right?
Yeah. So there you go.
So
scary to think about, though. The barber taking out your appendix.
Bloody creepy. But the point of all of this was to say that, yeah, the Blood Eagle's extreme. But it seems to be in line with a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of other evidence for similar things going on, and this is just a bit of an outlier. So, did it happen? I don't know. Could it have happened? Yes, absolutely, is my opinion. And there will be some scholars who will look at all this evidence, myself and my co-authors have pulled together, and just not be convinced and say, could it have happened? I don't think so. And that's their right. I hope most of them. I hope most of them will be convinced. I know some of them are not.
I think I know some of those who won't be convinced.
The problem is for me, I think like anything is possible because like it's to take you back to gangs again. Not that I'm an expert on gangs, but you only have to kind of look at some of the things that they do to each other, and it is even by today. Some of the killings are absolutely horrendous. Like it's because it is to send a message, is to do the most horrible thing they can think of, to then say, you don't fuck with us because this is what we will do to you. And it's barbaric. So people are capable of doing the most heinous things.
Completely agreed.
If a blood eagle is technically anatomically possible, then the chances that someone could have done it at some point throughout history.
Well, see, there's more to that as well. It's like it doesn't even have to be gangs. We see these kinds of actions happening in, revolutions or civil wars or any kind of uprising where people just do some incredibly horrendous things to other people, right? So,
thinking in the long term as well, like by the standards of humanity throughout history, we are remarkably well adjusted, right? Very few of us experience violence on a regular basis. By our standards, everyone in the Viking Age, just like a lot of, say, gangs in the Brazilian favelas, they've all got what we would consider high-grade PTSD all the time. They are all, doing horrendous things and being praised for it.
Yeah.
So that's a normal part of their culture in a way that it's not for us, which is one reason that to us some of this stuff seems really shocking.
Yeah, I mean, you only have to look at what the Nazis and the Japanese were doing to people in World War II to understand like how horrific humans can really be to each other. So, if that kind of thing can go on, where you're sewing other people's arms on bodies just as an experiment, then I don't see how anyone can say it's impossible.
So I think that some of that comes from the fact that some historians are what we'd call positivist. Basically, they won't believe anything has happened until they see the evidence for it, and they will say we don't know, or I don't think so. And with Vikings in particular, because Vikings are so widely popular and they have this popular reputation for being super bloody and super violent, a lot of scholars have to spend a lot of time explaining that no, they were ordinary people. Most of the time, they weren't stabbing each other. Okay, I know I'm maybe undercutting a little bit what I just said about everyone having PTSD, but even the most bloody Viking who went off raiding spent 9 months of the year on his farm raising sheep.
Yeah. Okay.
And there might be the occasional stabbing over like grazing rights. That totally happened. But most people weren't these bloody warriors full time, and so these scholars are fed up of they've spent the last their entire career fighting back against this idea of Vikings as nothing but bloody killers.
But we also have.
I can understand where they're coming from. Sorry, go Mathias.
We also have another aspect of this, and that's us Scandinavians, we would like our ancestors to seem a little less psychotic, a little less barbaric. That's definitely also part of it. I feel like I'm seeing in scholarship in general. Certain, you could talk about scholarly communities. I think so certain communities are more aware and worried about those kinds of ideas about their distant ancestors, and so I could also see how it would be rejected from simply just like a knee-jerk reaction, and that has something to do with my identity actually.
Some of it is also generational. So like, we've got a massive wave of Viking pop culture now, right? Vikings are in again, and the last time they were in like this was the 80s, when like the predominant ideology in the Western world was kind of hardcore capitalism. Everybody's a rational economic actor, and so the Vikings in that wave of pop culture, they were traders more than they were raiders, and they were savvy businessmen who ripped off the Christians and stuff. And scholars who came up during that period and had their early interactions with Vikings in that period are shaped by it. Just like undoubtedly Matthias and I are shaped by the present wave of Viking stuff, which fully embraces the blood and the chaos and the violence of the Viking Age. And it might be that if Matthias and I ever have students of our own in 20, 30 years time, they're being taught something completely different, and they find us old-fashioned and fuddy-duddy.
Probably yes.
I'm pretty sure I already have students who consider me that, but
exactly.
Basically, ideas change is what I'm saying, and because of that, they're not only across geography. Matthias, you talk about Scandinavians having a particular opinion. I think different generations of scholar will also tend to have more common opinions.
Absolutely. I mean, actually, it's funny that you mentioned this. In Scandinavia, we in the 60s had a tendency to, or we had a lot of scholars who had this is why nowadays when people are like shouting Marxism at everything, I'm like, you don't even know what you're talking about. Go back to the 1960s and read historical research from Scandinavia. There is some Marxism for you.
We had Vikings seizing the means of production quite literally at spear point.
Exactly. Yes. Like this, all these ideas of like, the farming communities basically being like little communes and stuff like that. That was prevalent back then. So, yeah, no, of course, like different time periods have different the things they want to focus on and aspects of a very complex culture that they want to bring to the fore and say, this is exactly what defines these people, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, so Luke, I guess how common would it have been if it happened? I guess what I'm thinking is maybe even if it happened once or twice, that if it's that barbaric, it would be something that would live on through story anyway. If there was just one jarl somewhere or one king somewhere that was particularly mean and he did this to somebody, then I feel like that is something that would kind of be told through stories and then bring its own life almost anyway. So even if it was just a one-time thing and it wasn't practiced by everyone, it was just this one twat that did it.
Totally. And yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. So I said earlier we've got these 9 descriptions from across 3 centuries. Those are 9 descriptions of 4 cases. There's only 4 blood eagles that are alleged to have taken place by these written sources. One of them is fictional, like explicitly so. It's not 2 kings doing it to each other. It's like a heroic Icelandic Viking warrior doing it to a supernatural troll who rules an island. Right? There's no way we're claiming that's historical.
Okay.
So
They speak for yourself, man.
So like, even if we were the most we believed everything these things said, if we took it very literally, there would be three blood eagles.
Okay.
So I completely agree that a little bit like what Roberta Frank, the scholar, who was like, oh, this is all just poetry that's been misunderstood and then has got no life of its own and the story has gotten bigger and bigger as time's gone on. I totally agree. This might only have ever happened once, but because it is so cool and extreme and bloody, it's become like this motif that gets attached to different legendary kings and legendary villains.
Mm-hmm. I guess it's kind of almost a thing that just spreads like wildfire almost. It's like, if you were there or you heard about it happening, it's like, fucking hell, that's so insane that you're going to tell whoever you meet for like the next week, and they're probably going to tell everyone they meet for the next week, and it's just going to spread out until everyone's like, that guy over in the next village, like, did you hear what he did to somebody? And I feel like it just passes on to and then becomes the norm almost.
And you know what? It might not have ever happened, but you might have had Vikings who believed it did. Just like, so I mean, the positive case is that Colombian necktie, right? We've all heard of that. We all know what that is. None of us have ever seen it. None of us have ever known someone who's seen it done. But word has spread, and we all accept it.
Yeah.
And in this instance, there have been photographs and stuff. And I'm trying to think of another case where, like an urban legend or something, where we all believe someone did something or a thing has been done and it didn't. I can't think it.
I think
yeah,
the one for me that kind of comes to mind, and this is just one that I remember from a kid.
Yeah.
Anybody that's ever been on Creepypasta remembers
Right.
that website. And the one from me was the Russian guys who apparently stayed up for a week solid. And there was this article about how in Russia they'd come up with this chemical that meant people didn't need to sleep, but after 7 days they went insane and one of them killed the rest. And there's like these weird pictures that had been photoshopped. And that was one that kind of always stuck with me. And but it spread kind of around the internet as being real. And it was almost kind of like, because you didn't see it and you didn't know about it, it was kind of, I guess it could be possible.
Right.
And people assume it's real until you kind of Google it a little bit and go, oh, fucking hell, that's not actually real.
Right, that's exactly what I'm getting at. And I'm sure at the back of my head there's some sort of example of some grisly murder that is alleged to have taken place and didn't actually, but everyone thinks happened. And I can't remember what it is. But that kind of urban legend isn't necessarily something that, say, Christian monks made up about Vikings because they weren't godly enough. That's totally possible that some Vikings are telling to each other. Oh, well, my ancestor did this. Oh, well, don't go up to Norway because they'll do this to you.
Yeah.
Don't go to Norway, you'll get blood eagled. That's a pretty severe way of deterring your kids from going to a place you don't like.
This is what happened with that Icelandic hero and his blood brother, right? The blood brother gets a prophecy. You must not go to Norway. If you do, you'll die a bloody death. And he was like, I don't believe in prophecy. And what happens? A troll that lives under a mountain rips out his guts and makes him walk around them. So yeah, he died a bloody death. So
yeah, okay.
Be careful with Norway, is what I'm saying.
Matthias, you say that, but I mean, I have a story that my mum used to tell me that her mum, so my grandma, in Huddersfield, where I'm from, there's a place called Lion Chambers, and on top there's a giant kind of, I guess it's a stone lion that's always sat there. You kind of know it has been a piece of Huddersfield, and I guess you can Google it and find it. And what my grandma used to say to my mum when she was young was that if you stayed out after 9 o'clock in the town centre, the lion would come down and kind of chase you off or eat you. And it's like, parents tell kids shitty things sometimes to deter them. So like you say, it's kind of extreme saying don't go to Norway for a blood eagle. Like my mum used to get told a lion was going to come and eat her if she stayed out after 9 o'clock.
Fair point. Yeah. No, I mean, I've also been told all kinds of crazy stories as a kid. I mean, so yeah. No, it makes total sense.
So Luke, I wanted to ask about obviously the Fatal Walk. I've never heard of it before. You touched on it a little bit. Sounds pretty much up my street, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you seem to have enjoyed the Blood Eagle, so let's see what you make of the Fatal Walk. So
I'm one of these people that loves kind of gruesome programs and serial killer one of those weird people that really like serial killer shows.
Yeah, Daniel, now you're outing yourself again.
Oh, come on, he's hardly alone. There are we're on a podcast, right? There are so many true crime podcasts. This is totally normal.
Oh,
yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah,
right. Sarah, my wife, absolutely loves like anything to do with. It started out with Jack the Ripper, to be honest. She just really liked that and kind of got into, I wouldn't say obsessed, but like loves true crime, but particularly like serial killer stuff, and I guess more like the mental side of to why and how people do.
I get it.
What they do.
That is fascinating. I get it.
But when you hear like some of the crimes and whatnot, it's kind of like fucking hell. People are shit.
Yeah, that they are. Well, some of them allegedly did this thing called the Fatal Walk, which it kind of didn't really happen. Like this one is anatomically impossible. Not like not like the Blood Eagle, where sure you can do it, they'll be dead within a minute or two, and then you're doing the rest of a corpse. This one couldn't happen. But basically, the motif in the stories is that you cut open the stomach and you pull out the guts, and then you nail the guts to a tree or a post of some sort, and then the victim has to walk around it. And so, like in that Icelander and the troll story I talked about earlier, the victim shows how manly he is and how honourable he is by composing a poem as he does the walk before he dies, which was a really positive thing. Like I know poetry sounds a bit effeminate in modern Western society, but think of it as composing like diss verses in a rap or something. He's basically telling this troll being that's doing it to him, "You are such a pussy. Look at how fucking manly I am. I'm taking this and I'm still telling you you're a dickhead." But the whole thing comes from Christian saints of all things. So like the Christians love to tell stories about how godly their martyrs were. And these martyrs weren't necessarily good people. They were just people who happened to get killed by non-Christians often. And so there are some cases from like East Anglia. There's one where a guy who was later made into a saint basically gets caught by some Vikings, tied to a tree and shot full of arrows. And they made him a saint for it. And there's a similar story with then another guy. In fact, there's a couple of stories I think with Christians having their guts pulled out and being made to walk around trees. And it seems to have been. Sorry, Matthias, do you want to jump in?
Aren't you talking about Saint Edmund?
I am.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he was a king. He was King Edmund as well.
I just thought that you said some guy, so I was like,
well, I mean, I did. He was also a guy.
That is true. Yes.
Maybe this is me being a bad Catholic. Of course, Saint Edmund is Saint, but he's a dude. Also a bad general because he got captured.
I guess so.
But basically, what seems to have happened now, looking at this with the historian hat on, is that these stories were getting circulated by Christians in the medieval period. And then, so this was stories were being told in what is today England and maybe France, and then the stories spread out over Europe and they reached Scandinavia, and it just becomes a cool way to torture somebody, and so it makes its way into stories that medieval Scandinavians are telling about their Viking ancestors, and so it turns up in things like Njala Saga, and it turns up in this Ormstalter, which is the one with the blood eagle. So it's just a motif like you would see the same. You might see the Colombian necktie in various true crime or kind of cartel dramas on Netflix. Kind of the motif itself spreads around.
Okay, but it's not real. It's not possible.
I thought it was. I thought it would be. And we talked about it with the anatomists, and they were like, "No, what? No, of course not."
That sounds more realistic than the blood eagle.
Agreed.
Possible.
Totally agreed.
What was their reasoning for saying that this you can't do that?
Well, basically, you can pull small lengths of intestine kind of out of the body, but the intestine isn't just kind of floating there. Along its whole length, it's anchored to the walls of the inside of your torso. So basically, by the time you pull much more than a short length out, the person you're doing it to is bleeding to death.
Okay.
And you pull too much out, they're going to bleed to death very quickly without like super modern surgical intervention.
Right.
Like there is no way that anyone who's got any intestines hanging out of them is going to be able to get up and walk around. Is there?
I've seen so many films where that happens as well.
Yes, so have I. And so like, I was genuinely like, I thought that was possible.
That is one that I think you do just assume.
I mean, wasn't there a guy in New York who was like doped up on something who threw his intestines at the cops? I'm pretty sure that's a news article out there somewhere. But I'm also now like this is messing with all of my concepts about like seppuku and the samurai suicide. I mean, but of course it makes sense. Like if you just like open your stomach, you just sit there and then bleed to death.
Well, that's it. I mean, that proves that proves the case rather than disproving it, right? Is that they cut the stomach open, they pull some guts out, and then they die.
Yeah, no, I mean, but the thing is also, so apparently, I mean, they get their heads chopped off as well. That's at least.
Oh yeah, true. They've got the second, right? Their friend who beheads them as soon as they've done it.
But so, I mean, I know very. It can take some time to die from the whole, opening up your own stomach. But of course, this also, brings me to another issue that I have now, right? And that is, of course, the story about Starkadr, the famed Ogenic Warrior who couldn't die, right? Who like had he got stabbed in his stomach at some point and like basically just had to like walk around forever with his stomach tied together because
I mean this is the same dude who in some stories has 4 arms, so
that is another part of it. Yes, he's also, when he actually dies, he gets decapitated, and then it's the story goes that he bites the grass, like his head like falls down and he's biting the grass like so there's a lot of funky stuff going on in that story, but nonetheless, like, I'm disappointed now.
So Luke, is there any more kind of torturous ways that we heard of or know of? I mean, obviously, I guess you've got the drowning, the hanging, the burning. Without saying they're boring, it's kind of like, I'm just thinking of like these really weird kind of ways that people would have been killed or punished for things.
I think these 2 are the most extreme, but there's one more that springs to mind for me, which is, how do you kill a witch?
Burn her, I guess.
Nope, don't burn her.
Or drown. Or drown.
Drown is acceptable.
A giant rock.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what do you do before you crush her with the giant rock?
Oh.
You put a bag over her head so she can't see who's doing it.
Oh, right.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, it's also because if they can see, then they can also, they can do things like they can send curses with their eyes too.
Exactly.
According to the sagas. So.
That's kind of almost like the executioner putting a bag over the head, but in fear from obviously the family, like retribution from the family against them for doing their job. I guess I guess it's kind of like that.
I'd say it's more like the Second World War, when they used to execute spies and things. They give them a blindfold and a cigarette, and it was the blindfold so they couldn't see it coming or something. But it's just something you did, right? You gave people a blindfold. Yeah, so as Matthias says, this turns up in a few different sagas, often enough and in different enough places that it seems to reflect something that probably happened in the Viking Age, and maybe it's connected to some of those graves that have had rocks put on them as well. Was that magicians and witches and wizards? You couldn't just stab them; they needed to be killed another way. Like you couldn't trust iron to harm a witch, or they might know spells that would turn your blade, which is probably originally based on the fact that most of these swords were just really crap quality iron, and so they would bend in a fight. And so you'd like around the edges of most battles, you'd probably have a dude with his foot on his sword trying to straighten it out before he can wade back in.
That's something they never show in the battle scenes.
That's not in Vikings, and I'm really disappointed.
Yeah, it's a grrr.
But
that would be hilarious. I mean, I wouldn't want to be the guy with the bent sword, to be fair, but
yeah. But so there's enough stories of magicians having to be like drowned, but usually when they're caught, they seem to stone them to death, and people are afraid of what I guess we might call the evil eye. That by killing a witch or a magician, by taking that kind of final blow, they would put a curse on you, and they'd be able to do so just by looking at you, just by making eye contact. And there's some weird stories about sometimes you had to look at magicians were looking at people in funny ways. Like there's something called magical mooning. Have you heard of this? This is basically old women who wanted to cast a spell would sometimes like bend over and throw their dresses over their heads so they're naked, and they would walk backwards with their head between their legs, showing you everything, and make eye contact and cast a spell at you that way.
Again, did you check this one with the physicians as well? Because it sounds anatomically a little complicated.
I mean, it depends how much yoga these old witches were doing, really, I think.
Well, okay. So there we have our Old Norse evidence for yoga.
Yeah, clearly.
Well, yes, for sure. Matthias, have you got any that you can add, kind of different ways of people being tortured or killed, I guess, in the Viking Age or in the mythology?
Well, I mean, we do also have. You briefly brought it up, Luke. This throwing people in a worm pit or in a snake's pit, right? It's called,
right, because that's the one that's typically, I guess, attributed to Ragnar.
Yeah,
is the one that springs to mind that most people will say happened.
But that's him. That's the dude linked with the Blood Eagle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so this is interesting, right? Because like, where would they get all those snakes from?
Right.
I mean, it's not like Scandinavia, for instance, is that like populated with snakes. We have like one venomous snake, I think, or two.
I mean, the Ragnar one takes place in northern England. I mean, you're a Huddersfield man. How many vipers were there growing up in Huddersfield?
Well, no, there's none.
Right.
But I mean, I don't know whether they were 1,000 years.
Right.
ago,
I mean, we do have adders in the UK. We do have poisonous snakes, and so it's not impossible. And it might be the sort of thing that, like, a mad king would do to show off how much of a badass he is. He'd have people dig a pit and fill it full, go hunting for snakes.
Well, that era, I guess maybe they just collected them from other places. Yeah. I mean, obviously there was elephants and lions in the Colosseum, and obviously they're not from Italy.
Well, that's important.
So like you could bring them in.
I mean, that would have been a lot easier with like the Roman Empire and the infrastructure of it. But I take your point. Fair point that you totally have had African snakes and stuff.
Yeah, but also I guess you can gather enough vipers, like local Northern English vipers, to, eventually have enough venom to kill somebody, right? I mean, totally. You can die from being bit by at least a common Danish viper. I mean, I don't think it happens that often, but you can.
I feel like a British viper would just make you a cup of tea. Like it would just, it would just get in, it'd give you like a cuddle and make you a brew.
No, I think it would tuss at you for cutting in line.
Yeah, it would just. I can't imagine a British viper trying to hurt anybody.
My mind is going straight to Winds in the Willows now. It's like it's hanging out with Badger and
that's
the
it.
Frog and I don't know what.
the badger definitely has a monocle as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
But sorry, the more I think about it, the more you're right. It's totally possible for them to have imported snakes. I mean, there were like really famous, really kind of not popular. What's the word I want? Successful, like people in the Anglo-Saxon church who were black Africans. So, like, of course, if people can come, why shouldn't snakes and animals? Yeah, completely.
Yeah, I mean, there are Vikings that imported peacocks, so
very true.
You know,
Okay.
to get buried with them.
So yeah, you know what? The more I think of this, it doesn't have to be a British viper. It can totally be an African something or other.
But I mean, no, this has been a fun one. I think people will really like to listen to this because it's a cool topic, and it's been like a fun chat rather than necessarily too information heavy. But I've certainly learned a lot about what is and isn't possible.
I'm glad. I've enjoyed it as well. Thanks for having me.
So have I.
Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun. I mean, is there anything you want to plug or shout out before you go, whether it's on a personal or anything you're working on,
So,
or where people can find you social media wise?
so I'm not big on social media. I do have a website which is luke-murphy.com, and I make an effort to put as much of my research on there open access. Like, so not all scholarship is just available for free to anybody. But because all of my work has been paid for by basically grants and university stuff, but as far as I see it, I'm paid by the public. So I try and put all of my research on there. The Blood Eagle research isn't out yet because we're having some difficulties with some skeptical scholars, which basically trying to get the stamp of approval from our peers. And we're getting closer, but it's been a long process. But that will eventually appear there.
Okay. Perfect. Yeah, we'll let people know when it is as well.
Oh, grand. Thank you.
Matthias, what about you?
Yeah, what about me? Yeah, you can always find me on Instagram. You can find the Nordic Mythology channel on Facebook, where I usually try to remember to post our podcast episodes. You can also find me and stuff that I do and blogs that I write on my website, NordicMythologyChannel.com. And yeah, aside from that, I just want to plug something that Luke actually also has been a little responsible for.
What have I done now?
Yeah.
that face then was a little bit like,
it's like,
what?
oh no, shit. No, so I just want to plug the third volume of the Pre-Christian Religions of the North's project, which is about, well, I have written 2 chapters for that volume, Cosmology and Cosmogony. And, you know, if you get that book, you can also read about the gods and all that stuff. And yeah, Luke was a part of making all of that possible.
I did some behind the scenes work many years ago. But if we're plugging fun stuff, actually thinking about it, one of the articles, my latest article on my website, is about British hair goddesses. So you asked me earlier about the Easter Bunny. There's nothing explicitly Easter Bunny there yet, but there is stuff about British hair goddesses over the centuries. So that might be worth having a look at.
I think that sounds really cool.
I think so too, but I wrote it, so you know.
So yeah, you can find me at Daniel_Farron1 on Instagram. Obviously the company at Horns of Odin as well. Yeah, formalities, I guess, is if you've enjoyed the podcast, please leave us a 5-star review and a positive rating. That would be great. You know, it helps us find new listeners, find new people to listen to the show. Also, if you want to pop over to Patreon, you can find all the video episodes of the podcast, so you can see our lovely faces as we talk. There's also ad-free episodes on there. I mean, we just released the Ina Selvik episode, so obviously the video for that will be on there, which will be a fun watch for people. I think you get the videos on the lowest price as well, so yeah, and it helps make the podcast better, and you know, we use all the money invested back in. So
you're not getting rich off it?
No.
I was hoping that
maybe one day.
I was hoping that meant Mathias would be buying my drinks next time I saw him in person.
Well, I'll always buy you a drink, buddy, but not from money made from a podcast.
Fair enough, so. Fair enough, so.
it's a labour of love, definitely. So yeah, thank you very much. It's been fun. It's been informative. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for having me. I've enjoyed it too.
No worries.
Take care, guys.
You too.